Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, also known as ETCG1 on this here channel. If it's your birthday, happy birthday. And now on to our topic at hand, and this one comes from the suggestion box. And I apologize for not remembering the name, but I'll put it up here on the screen for you. This poster had asked about the differences in working on vehicles from, let's say, the late 80s and that type of thing, as opposed to working on vehicles now, or something to that effect. I've got to be honest, it's been a little bit since I read that posting. So this got me to thinking. When I started my career as an automotive technician, it was in the early 90s, and there were still a lot of things that were left over from the 80s, the late 80s, that were out on the road. In fact, they were the bulk of the things that we were repairing at the time. I mean, if you don't really repair too many brand new cars, those are still under warranty. Those usually end up going back to the dealership. Where at the time I was working at an independent shop, and we had a lot of things rolling through the door, both foreign and domestic. One of the things that I noticed, and we had to learn a lot about this type of stuff in school, and it made things difficult, if I'm honest. I think the vehicles from the late 80s were probably some of the most difficult vehicles to work on, because that was a transitional period before fuel injection. So we still had carbureted vehicles, but they went through a great deal of effort, these Rube Goldberg setups, to try and conform with emission standards. And carburetors just don't cut it under a variety of conditions in the same way fuel injection can. Fuel injection's like brain surgery. Carburetors are like, you know, fixing a car with a hammer. They're two very different things. They both get the job done, but they do it in very different ways, and one is more efficient than the other. Fuel injection is way more efficient than something that's carbureted, and trying to make a carburetor efficient was very difficult. So we had these really super complex systems, this miles of vacuum lines underneath the hood that were just potential problems just waiting to happen. It made diagnosis extremely difficult. Also, we didn't have access to the computer parameters like we do today. So if, say for instance, it was running bad or you had a check engine light, you would, and many times, look for a blinking light somewhere. Maybe you hook up a special connector, maybe you jump out something in a connector, maybe you just look under the passenger seat, but there would be something that would flash a code, and those codes would be specific to manufacturers. So pre-OBD2, there were no standards. It was just whatever the manufacturer saw fit to create as a diagnostic procedure for their vehicle and their system was how it was. And we had just piles of books. It was like the Encyclopedia Britannica times 20 that was in the back of the shop so that we could reference. Also, this is before, you know, having computers that had all this information that was accessible online. I'm dating myself, I know, but I just want to try and illustrate what it was like to repair those older systems. So instead of being able to pull up a scan tool and plug it into an OBD2 port and pull up the parameters that the computer is seeing, you would get a flashing code that would tell you that there's a problem with system X. Now, you couldn't verify anything from that blinking light, so you had to physically go out there many times with a DVOM, take your measurements and hope they were correct or within specifications. And if they weren't within specifications, you either replaced the component or you found bad connectors or wiring elsewhere. This was difficult and problematic, testing TPS sensors directly at the sensor itself, whereas now you can do a myriad of these tests just by sitting in the driver's seat and being plugged in, as I mentioned. You can communicate with like door lock control modules and power windows and all that stuff, so you could sit there and activate that stuff right from a scan tool. Well, not the case back in the late 80s. Even some of the fuel injected systems were mechanical in nature. I'm thinking back to the Bosch L-Jetronic systems that were pretty neat, to where you actually dialed those in, or at least we did at our shop, with an emissions machine. So we'd put an exhaust probe in the tailpipe and monitor the emissions while we made adjustments to that mechanical setup. And the thing ran great when we were done, when we got it set up, but you had to have, I believe, a lot more knowledge then. And it was a lot grittier than it is now. Now it seems, and I'm not saying this is wrong, because I think from that period in history that manufacturers have gone to a different tactic as far as how they go about manufacturing and engineering their vehicles for repair. And in fact, I think they're, well, I can't really say that they're thinking about it more, because I think they've always had an eye on that. The dealership techs would get the most accurate information as far as how those systems work or are supposed to work and how to diagnose them. They sit down and they figure out the process and they say, okay, we're going to send our technicians off to school and we're going to teach them the proper methods on our vehicles. Well, somewhere along the line that information ends up in a service manual and the independent shop has to sift through it and hopefully get it right from there, which left you with a lot of experience that you needed to bring to the table in order to be effective. Whereas today, I think, they manufacture things to almost spoon feed you. And I'm not saying you plug in, you get a code and you replace a part, because as you know, I'm not necessarily an advocate of that. There are times, yes, where that's applicable, but for the most part, that's something we want to try to avoid. It's in our best interest to try to do our due diligence to verify that something is actually bad. And in those older school methods of diagnostics, it was, I don't want to say easier, but a little more direct. You knew that if you checked the resistance on something and you saw infinite resistance on something you were supposed to have a few ohms with, that yes, that indeed that part was bad. Whereas now I think they've set it up to where you don't have to go through that trouble. They've tried to streamline the process of diagnosis. So these days I think we'll call them modern technicians. The ones that are diagnosticians are really savvy with their scan tools and lab scopes. Take Scanner Danner, for instance. He is very versed in those things and teaches classes on it to try to teach you when you're out in the world of how to understand those systems, communicate with those systems, and read what they're telling you as far as what those faults might be. Whereas back in the day, it was open up a book, do some research, maybe call some friends, maybe call somebody at that dealership that might have that factory training that you could say, hey, you know, have you seen this? Or, you know, do you know what's going on with this? Can you point me in the right direction? That was how we did it back then, quote unquote. Whereas now, I can say that it seems easier, but in many ways you become a computer technician, more so than an auto repair technician. And that's the difference, I think. Back then, it was, like I said, grittier. So you could have a guy that could be well-versed at putting ball joints on and that type of thing, and just as easily be good at diagnostics, so a more well-rounded approach. Whereas now it seems there are specialists, or they've put us in positions where we're specialists, to where you've got somebody who's a specialist with brakes and suspension, and maybe somebody who's a specialist in diagnostics. I've even heard of people that, including Scanner Danner, who go around to different shops and help them with their problem vehicles. So they've got an issue they can't quite nail down. They call somebody like Scanner Danner in, and that's all they do, is they go around from shop to shop doing those diagnostics and helping those people out. Because it's not necessarily cost effective for an independent shop to send their technicians off for that type of training, particularly if they're working on many different makes and models. It's just not cost effective, whereas the dealership is tied in with the manufacturer, and in many times is mandated that they send at least 1 or 2 technicians off to their schools for a given amount of time during the year. But my point is, there certainly has been a sea change in the way vehicles are manufactured, the way we go about diagnosing and repairing vehicles today as opposed to 25 years ago. I think that trend is going to continue. In fact, I touched on this a little bit in the non-serviceable parts video, into where I believe that we will reach a point to where it's going to be component replacement. And when you plug in that scan tool, or maybe you wouldn't be plugging in scan tools at that point, I don't think. There'll be like some sort of Bluetooth connectivity or some other wireless connection between you and the vehicle that you should be able to access. Now, not to say that those systems can't fail and you have issues there, but I see a car pulling into a bay and you can just type in a few keywords or whatever it is into your system to gain access to the diagnostic system. It'll tell you the area that the fault is there, and probably perhaps have a video showing you how to replace a component. BMW has a system, I know BMW does, and there's probably other ones out there, but where you put on like this headset and it has all that information that you visually see before you. So when you're looking at the car, it gives you highlights and overviews of, okay, remove this fastener here, remove this fastener here. It's an interesting system to see where we're going. But I imagine in another 25 years, it will be more like that. And it will be step by step walking you through the process of how to replace a component that's suspected to have failed. And sort of take out that whole, you know, scratching your head as a technician, as somebody who understands the system, and taking that away from us. I think that they're moving in that direction. I think they're going to have a hard time doing it, But I think with the simplification and modularization of vehicles, it will become easier because it will be just more cost effective to replace an entire unit or component of that vehicle than it is to try and figure out exactly what's wrong with it, particularly in warranty situations. You can bring it in and say you've got a failed component. As I said in that last video, I can see suspension / brake modules or just replacing the entire brake assembly, the entire hub assembly, wheel bearing and everything, and just swapping something like that out for a suspected failure. Because I see more things like hybrids with regenerative braking, stop-start technologies, all that kind of stuff being incorporated into for fuel economy and weight savings and everything else. It's an interesting path that we're on, and I know I've talked quite a bit in this video and thrown quite a bit of stuff at you. However, it was an interesting topic that was brought up over at the forum, and hey, we talk about stuff here in ETCG1, so it's always nice to talk it out. Anyway, I'd love to see what you do with this, what your experience is. Some of you out there have way more experience than me with these things, and I appreciate your input. So not only will there be a link in the description to the forum discussion about this video, but feel free to comment as well. I do read through all of those, even though I don't respond to each and every single one of them. If you have automotive questions, I would ask that you head over to airatthecarguy.com. Yes, go to airatthecarguy.com. Welcome video there to tell you about all the stuff there to help you with automotive issues, should you have them. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, Twitter, and now Instagram. And I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, stay dirty. See you next time. Thanks for watching.